The video auto-played before I could breathe, and there was my kitchen, lights low, a laugh not mine, a shadow crossing the tile like a trespass. I heard my own voice say, "Ethan, where are you?" And the ringing felt cruel. Lila's perfume seemed to seep through the screen, sweet and smug. Ethan answered, running late. "Don't wait up," and my jaw locked so hard it clicked. The camera panned, and a familiar gray shirt hung on a chair like a flag of surrender. I whispered, "That's yours," and hated the tremor. A glass tipped, a giggle, a kiss that sounded like tearing paper. Lila said, "She'll get over it," and the words cut clean. I pressed pause and saw my reflection layered over them, a ghost in my own house. Rain hammered the window, and I thought it was applause for their show. Ethan said we were done anyway, and I swallowed blood I didn't have. I stood, grabbed my keys, and the room tilted. "You chose this," I said to the empty air, and the empty air agreed. I replayed the clip and mapped the shadows to my own counters, like a detective who already knew the culprit. "You picked my house," I said, and the room answered with rain. A faint perfume clung to the hallway rug, bright and cruel. Ethan texted, "Don't wait up," and the lie felt efficient, like a receipt. I walked to the sink and found a lipstick cap near the soap, a small crown for a petty queen. "Enjoy the throne, Lila," I said, and the words steadied me. I opened the fridge and saw the cake I baked for his promotion, untouched and shivering. Lila had posted a story, a shot of a gray cuff with a caption that begged for envy. I felt the humiliation burn, clean and clarifying. No more begging, I told the ghost of old me. The storm outside lifted like a warning siren. I wiped the counter until the marbles shone like armor, and I kept wiping until I could see the shape of a plan. He came in with rain in his hair and excuses in his pocket. Ethan said, "You're making a scene," and I laughed because there was no one to perform for. "You brought the audience," I said, pointing at the screen paused on her smile. He shrugged, the gesture small and practiced. "It's not what you think," he offered, "the classic lullaby for fools." "I think it's exactly what you practiced," I said, and his eyes slid to the chair with his shirt. He reached for my hand, gentle like theft. "We're toxic," he added, as if the diagnosis cured the harm. "Then stop drinking me," I said, and pulled away. He looked past me, checking for escape routes. "You'll thank me," he said, and the rain laughed for me. "Not tonight," I said, and the words sounded like a door locking from the inside of my chest. After he left, the silence paced the room like a patient hunter. I sat on the floor with the cake and a fork and no appetite. Jenna called, and her voice arrived like a porch light. Jenna said, "Tell me everything," and I did, each word a shard. She exhaled when I finished and said, "I'm sorry, but you are not small." I closed my eyes and saw Lila's caption again, begging for a chorus. "This ends with me," I said, though it had started long before tonight. Jenna said, "Then end it clean," and the phrase settled like a compass. I wrapped the cake and put it away, like a body that deserved respect. The storm finally broke, soft and relieved. I wiped my cheeks and told the room, "You don't get to keep me like this." Dawn squared its shoulders over the city, and my spine copied the gesture. I wrote 3 lines on a sticky note and stuck it to the mirror like a contract. "No contact, no crying, no mercy," I read aloud, and the words fit. I opened a folder on my laptop, labeled receipts, and built a new one named Closure. "You wanted a show," I said to the empty kitchen. "Then watch." I listed passwords, timelines, and names, every detail I had ignored in softer days. Jenna texted, "You sure?" and I typed, "I'm done being sure for someone else." I tied my hair back and felt lighter, not kinder. Somewhere, Lila was dressing like victory. "I'll borrow the costume," I said, and smiled without warmth. The sun found the ring dish and made it glint like a warning bell. Morning arrived sharper than the night, and I walked into a cafe where Mr. Harris waited like he had been sitting through storms for decades. He lifted his cup and said, "You've seen the truth." I nodded, the words stuck in my throat. "And now you want revenge?" he added, eyes heavy with old scars. I answered, I want her to feel the same emptiness she left me with. He leaned closer, voice low, but emptiness doesn't vanish when you pass it on. It follows you. I said, then let it follow, I'm not afraid. He studied me, the way one might watch fire in dry grass. Fire burns everything in reach, he warned. I pressed my hand to the table and whispered, she already burned me. Now, it's her turn. He sighed, like a man replaying his own mistakes, and said, if you walk this path, don't expect to come back the same. The bell above the door rang, and I knew it was already too late to turn back. We stepped outside, and the city moved as if nothing had cracked in my chest. Harris walked with a limp, every step like a lesson. He said, I tried revenge once, and it cost me everything worth keeping. I asked, and if you hadn't tried? He looked at me with something like pity. It would have eaten me alive. We paused at a corner where the storm drain still whispered last night's rain. I told him, I'm not asking for clean, I'm asking for fair. He shook his head. Fairness doesn't live here. Only hunger and ash. My voice was steady when I said, then I'll feed the hunger until she chokes. He stopped, hand on my shoulder, grip firm. Then at least be clever. Don't lose yourself in the smoke. I pulled free, not ungrateful, but unwilling to be softened. She stole my man and she'll pay. That's all that matters. That night I called Jenna, and she arrived carrying hesitation in her smile. She dropped her bag on the couch and said, you're scaring me with this silence. I handed her the phone with Lila's smug story still on the screen. Jenna muttered, she's daring you to react. I whispered, then I'll give her a reaction she won't forget. Jenna sat, shoulders slumped, and said, I'll help, but only because I don't trust you alone with this. I laughed, bitter but grateful. You never did, I said. She squeezed my arm. Promise me you won't lose yourself. I answered, losing myself already happened when he chose her. She sighed, and the silence between us felt like a contract signed in fear. The next day I walked into the gallery where Lila paraded Ethan like a new diamond. She turned, smile too polished, and said, Maya? What a surprise! I let the silence stretch long enough to sting. Ethan's eyes darted, but his mouth stayed closed. I replied, just admiring the art. Her smirk widened, and she leaned close enough for me to catch her perfume again. He's happier now, she whispered, low but sharp. I held her gaze, steady as glass. Happiness has a short shelf life, I said, and stepped past her. Behind me, Ethan muttered something to calm her, but I caught the tremor in her voice when she snapped back. For the first time I saw a crack in her armor, and it fed me more than air ever could. That night, I sat at my desk and spread papers like war maps. Photos, receipts, texts, each a weapon waiting to be sharpened. I whispered to myself, she thinks this was her victory lap, but it was the start of her undoing. Jenna called from the other room, Are you sure about this? I didn't answer. My silence was the loudest yes. Harris's warning echoed in my head, but it felt like a dare instead of a barrier. I picked up a pen and circled her name like an execution order. Lila Hart, I said, tasting each syllable like poison and medicine all at once. Outside, the city lights blinked like accomplices. The plan was no longer a thought. It was a living thing, breathing with me, waiting for its first strike. I sat in my car across from the bar where Lila liked to celebrate herself, the neon signs flickering like accomplices. I scrolled through her posts, each one tagged to this place, each photo staged to wound me. I whispered, You're careless with your footprints. I snapped pictures of her license plate, her entry times, her company, every detail stacking like bricks in a wall she couldn't climb over. A man brushed past her on the sidewalk, and she laughed, tossing her hair like an actress playing the same tired role. I noted it all. Times, faces, details. Harris's words replayed, Fire burns everything. And I muttered back, then let her be the ash. The rain started again, misty this time, soft enough to hide me but clear enough to see her smile. I see you now, I said, and my camera clicked like a vow. A knock came on my door the next evening, sharp and deliberate. When I opened it, a tall man in a black coat stared back, his presence like a warning. He said, "Lila wants you to stop." My fingers curled tight around the frame. "Tell her I haven't even started," I answered. He leaned closer, voice low. "She doesn't play fair." I whispered, "Neither do I." His jaw ticked, a muscle twitching like a gun cock. He slipped a folded note into my hand, and I didn't need to read it to know it was a threat. As he walked away, his shadow stretched long across the hallway, heavy as chains. I shut the door and pressed my back to it, pulse racing. "So she sends muscle now," I muttered. The war was no longer silent. It had a face. Jenna slammed the note on my counter, her hands shaking. "This isn't a game, Maya," she said. I sat calm, sipping tea, eyes fixed on the words that threatened me with silence. "It's not a game, it's a reckoning," I answered. She leaned forward, voice breaking. "You're changing, and not in ways I like." I met her eyes steady. "I'm not changing. I'm remembering who I was before I believed his lies." Jenna shook her head, tears threatening. "If you keep this up, you'll lose me too." My chest ached at her words, but I didn't flinch. "Then stay close enough to pull me back," I said, though I knew she might not. She covered her face with her hands, and the silence between us grew louder than any storm. At the gallery's new exhibit, I walked in uninvited heels, striking the polished floor like gunshots. Lila turned, her smile faltering for a fraction before reforming. "Maya," she greeted, voice sugar over steel. Ethan hovered behind her, eyes darting like a trapped bird. I strolled closer, admiring the paintings. "Beautiful illusions," I said, each word a knife. She tilted her head, whispering, "Jealousy doesn't suit you." I leaned in, voice low but sharp. "Neither does theft." Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't break. Ethan stepped forward, murmuring, "This isn't the place." I smirked, eyes locked on hers. Everywhere is the place when truth is on display. I turned and walked away, but I left her trembling in the shadows of her own performance. Later that night, I sat alone with a photo of Ethan and me, edges curled like the memory itself. I traced the smiles with a fingertip, hollow inside. My mind flashed to the victim of all this, the version of me who had trusted, who had loved without suspicion. That girl was gone, sacrificed on the altar of his betrayal. I whispered, "You deserved better," and the echoes stung. Harris' words rang again, warning of fire, but the image of Lila laughing in my kitchen burned brighter. I pinned the photo to the board beside my collected evidence, not as memory, but as motive. "This ends with me," I vowed, and the words carried the weight of someone who had nothing left to lose. I sat at my desk, piecing together timelines like a puzzle no one wanted solved, when a folder slipped from the stack. Inside were bank statements, Ethan's name tied to transfers I didn't recognize. My chest tightened as I whispered, "So it wasn't just betrayal of love, it was money too." Numbers aligned with nights he claimed, late meetings, nights he was with her. I traced the path, each figure another knife twisting. Lila hadn't stolen him. They had built this together, carving me out while feeding off my trust. The air turned thin, heavy with a new truth. It wasn't only about him choosing her, it was about them using me. My rage cooled into something sharper, like ice forming over fire. I said aloud, "This is bigger than I thought," and the walls seemed to lean closer, listening. I met Harris the next morning at the park, his cane digging into wet earth as he walked beside me. He listened as I explained the transfers, the stolen money. His eyes darkened with memory, and he said, "I once trusted a partner who did the same." He sat on a bench, voice heavy. I thought revenge would heal me, but all it left was scars. I asked, "So you'd rather let them walk free?" He shook his head. "No, but I learned that exposing the truth cuts deeper than violence ever could." I sat beside him, staring at the pond rippling with ducks. "I want her ruined," I confessed. Harris leaned closer, eyes steady. "Then shine a light. Darkness shrivels when it's seen." His words felt like both advice and warning. and I wasn't sure which to follow. That night I spread photographs across my table, each one proof of their scheme. But something new surfaced in my mind. A conversation overheard months ago where Ethan had whispered about debts. My heart froze as realization struck. I wasn't his only target. He'd charmed others, used them, drained them. I whispered, "It was never about me. I was just one of many." My reflection in the window looked back, hollow yet sharpened. Betrayal was no longer personal. It was a pattern. Their love wasn't love. It was partnership in crime. I felt my anger grow beyond myself, becoming something larger, heavier. "She wasn't my rival," I said, voice shaking. "She was his accomplice." The truth was worse than I had imagined, and the story I was writing turned darker by the minute. I wasn't the only one doubting loyalty. Later that week, Marcus appeared again, but this time his tone was fractured. He handed me another note, but his eyes didn't hold the same coldness. "You don't know what she's capable of," he muttered. I asked, "Then why follow her?" His jaw tightened, but his silence spoke louder than words. He wasn't just her enforcer, he was trapped, bound by something I didn't yet see. His gaze lingered on the bruises across his knuckles before he turned away. For the first time I saw hesitation, and hesitation was a crack. "Even her shadows want out," I whispered after he left, and the thought gave me fuel. If her strongest ally was wavering, her empire was weaker than she believed. At my desk I mapped out everything again, but the pieces had shifted. It was no longer just a betrayal. It was theft, fraud, a pattern of lies stretching beyond me. I whispered, "She thinks she's untouchable, but truth will shatter her." The plan I had once envisioned as revenge sharpened into something cleaner: exposure. Still, anger sat heavy in my chest, and I wondered if justice without blood would be enough. I circled both their names, red ink bleeding across the page like a wound that refused to close. Jenna peeked in, her eyes weary, and asked, "Are you ready to finish this?" I smiled faintly, though it wasn't warm. "I'm ready to end it," I said, and my voice sounded final. The board of evidence glowed under the lamp like a battlefield, and I knew the war was only beginning. The evening stretched long as I placed calls to people I barely knew, but Lila trusted. Old colleagues, gallery assistants, even her so-called friends, all carrying fragments of grudges. I painted myself as the sympathetic victim, but beneath the surface I was a strategist aligning pawns. Each whisper I dropped about her dishonesty cracked her mask further. "Did you know about the stolen funds?" I asked one, feigning confusion. Silence often told me more than words. By the time I hung up the last call, the web around her was quivering. I thought of her smug smile at the gallery and whispered, "Let's see how long you can hold it." My phone buzzed with a new message, one of her allies already questioning her. The plan had grown teeth. Jenna sat cross-legged on my couch, her arms folded, face locked in quiet disapproval. "You're weaving lies with lies," she said, her voice soft but sharp. I shrugged, eyes on the glowing evidence board. "Sometimes you fight fire with fire," I answered. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I'm afraid you won't know when to stop." I turned to her, half smiling without warmth. Stopping has never been her specialty. Why should it be mine? The silence stretched between us, heavy as chains. Finally Jenna whispered, "I'm here, but I don't know for how long." Her words pierced deeper than any of Lila's threats, yet I nodded, as though I had accepted the cost already. The room grew colder, the shadows lengthened, and loyalty itself felt fragile. Lila's confidence began to crack. I saw it in the way she overposted, flaunting moments as if proving something. I watched one story of her holding Ethan's hand, but his eyes were distant, darting from the camera. I muttered, "Even he knows the mask is slipping." She walked into a cafe, laughing too loudly, but I saw the tension in her shoulders. For the first time, she wasn't celebrating, she was defending herself. Rumors I seeded had spread faster than fire, and now she was scrambling to douse them. I whispered, "Arrogance makes you predictable," and noted her new routine. She had no idea the stage she built was the very place where she would stumble. My first attempt to corner her fell apart when Ethan appeared uninvited. I had arranged for a gallery contact to confront Lila with rumors of fraud, but Ethan intercepted. He smoothed the tension with practiced charm, redirecting suspicion onto others. Watching him lie with ease made bile rise in my throat. And whoa! For a moment, I almost stepped forward to expose everything then and there, but I held back. Too soon, I whispered to myself. Lila smirked, brushing imaginary dust off her sleeve, eyes flicking to the crowd as if daring me to move. My chest burned with rage, but my mind stayed cold. This wasn't failure, it was rehearsal. They thought they had shut the door, but they had only given me more keys. Later that night, Marcus stood at the end of my street, waiting like a ghost who couldn't leave. His face looked older, weathered by choices he couldn't unmake. When I approached, he muttered, "She's not as untouchable as she thinks." I froze, realizing he was offering me a thread. His loyalty had cracked, and he was slipping truths through the fracture. "She's been moving money offshore," he whispered, voice low. My breath caught, the puzzle finally aligning. "Why tell me?" I asked. He glanced away, jaw tight. "Because I've seen what she does to people. And maybe I want to stop before it's too late." As he walked away, the weight of his words settled in me like gunpowder waiting for a match. The night of confrontation arrived, heavy with silence before the storm. I stood outside the gallery where Lila was hosting her grand event, the same place she flaunted her victories. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear. It was clarity. I whispered, "This ends tonight." Jenna's voice echoed in my memory, warning me of the cost, but I pushed the thought aside. Inside, the crowd shimmered under chandeliers, unaware they were about to witness the collapse of a queen. I carried the files, the evidence, the poison made of truth. Paris had said, "Shine a light," and I intended to blind her with it. Each step toward the door felt like walking into fire, but my resolve was steel. I muttered, "No turning back now," and pushed inside. I moved through the glittering crowd, every conversation a hum of distraction. Lila stood center stage, radiant in her emerald dress, Ethan at her side like a polished prop. She raised a glass, her smile painted perfection. I felt heat crawl up my chest as I stepped forward. "Lovely speech," I said loudly enough for heads to turn. Her smile flickered, then steady. "Maya," she purred, "you weren't invited." I lifted the folder, my voice carrying. "No, but the truth doesn't need an invitation." A ripple moved through the guests, whispers blooming like wildfire. Ethan shifted, face pale, his grip on her arm tightening. Lila's eyes narrowed, but I saw fear flicker beneath the mask. I opened the folder, spilling papers across the stage like snow, each one marked with their names, their transfers, their crimes. Gasps echoed as people bent to read, voices rising in disbelief. Ethan grabbed for the papers, his hand shaking, muttering, "This is nothing." But his tone betrayed him, weak, trembling. Lila hissed, "You're pathetic," and shoved him aside in front of everyone. The crowd recoiled, whispers sharp as knives. I leaned in, voice cold. "She wasn't your savior, Ethan. She was your partner in theft." His face drained of color, and hers flushed with rage. For the first time she stood exposed, stripped of her careful lies. Before Lila could recover, Marcus stepped from the shadows, his voice cutting through the noise. "She made me silence others too," he said, lifting his bruised hands for all to see. The crowd gasped again, eyes widening. Lila's composure cracked, her lips trembling as she hissed, "Traitor." Marcus shook his head, steady now. "No, survivor." Paris's words rang in my ears. Light piercing darkness. Lila lunged at me, desperation finally visible, but Ethan held her back, shouting, "You ruined us." Their facade shattered in front of their glittering audience. For once I didn't have to speak. The truth was louder than my voice. The room erupted, phones raised, cameras flashing. Lila screamed denials, Ethan begged, but their empire collapsed in real time. I stood still, breathing steady, watching the predators turn prey. Jenna appeared at my side, whispering, "It's over." But as I stared at them, broken and small, I realized ending them didn't end me. My chest ached with hollow victory. Harris's warning returned like smoke in my lungs. Fire burns everything, I whispered to myself, and sometimes it burns the one who lit it. I turned and walked out into the night, leaving the crowd to devour them. The rain washed over me, cold and relentless, like judgment. The fallout came swiftly. News outlets ran headlines about Lila and Ethan's fraud, their empire collapsing under the weight of exposure. I watched from a cafe window as their faces filled the screen, voices from strangers condemning them with the venom they once reserved for me. Lila screamed denials into microphones. Ethan stayed silent, hollow and beaten. For once they weren't untouchable, they were devoured by the very world they had sought to impress. I sipped my coffee, calm but not triumphant, and whispered, "Now everyone sees you." Victory tasted bitter, but it was victory nonetheless. Alone in my apartment, I stared at the evidence board one last time. Strings of red, photos, receipts, all the pieces that once consumed me. My hand trembled as I pulled them down, each tack clicking like an ending note. The silence in the room grew lighter with each paper that hit the floor. Jenna's words echoed in my head, "Promise me you won't lose yourself." Maybe I already had, but I refused to stay lost. I whispered, "No more altars of betrayal." For the first time in months, the board was empty, and the wall looked like a clean slate. I met Harris in the park again, the morning crisp and quiet. He watched me approach, his eyes softer now. "You finished it," he said, not asking but knowing. I sat beside him, answering. "I ended them, but not without ending parts of myself." He nodded, cane resting against the bench. "That's the price of fire," he said. We sat in silence, the pond reflecting a pale sky. I realized then that revenge hadn't healed me. It had only cleared the rubble so something new could grow. Harris glanced at me, his voice low. "Now choose what to build in the ashes." I closed my eyes and let the wind answer for me. Jenna stood in my doorway that evening, eyes searching mine for remnants of the woman she once knew. "Is it over?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then nodded. She stepped inside, pulling me into a hug I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time, I let myself break, tears slipping down my face. "You scared me," she whispered. I held on tighter. I scared myself too. The weight I carried for months finally shifted, replaced by a fragile sense of peace. We didn't speak further. The silence said enough. We were both still here, scarred but standing. That night, I walked to the balcony, city lights blinking like watchful eyes. The storm had passed, the air sharp with promise. I whispered to the night, no contact, no crying, no mercy, the vow that had carried me here. But I added one more line softly, no more chains. The city didn't answer, but it didn't need to. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, knowing the story wasn't about them anymore. It was about me stepping out of the shadows they left behind. My revenge was complete, but my life was just beginning.